Hi everybody, it's Mr. Garrett again, and we're going to learn a little bit about polynomial division. This video is going to cover how to do both long and synthetic polynomial division, and we're going to use that later on to solve polynomial equations. So it's very important that we work on this skill first. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a trip back to about 3rd or 4th grade when we learned how to do long division. Doing long division with numbers is the basis for doing long division with polynomials. So let's start off here with the problem written down, 24,604 divided by 3. Now when we do this, we first focus on this 3 and we say, does 3 go into 2? We say, no, it doesn't go into 2. And then we say, does 3 go into 24? And we say, sure, 3 goes into 24 8 times. And so we say 8 times 3 is 24, and we write it down, and then we subtract, and we get 0, and that's good. And then we bring down the 6. And we say, okay, does 3 go into 6? We say, sure, 3 goes into 6 2 times. So 2 times 3 is 6. We subtract, and we get 0. Then we bring down another 0. We say, okay, does 3 go into 0? We say, no, 3 doesn't go into 0. So we put a 0 here, and then we multiply and nothing happens. And then we bring down the 4, and we say, okay, now, does 3 go into 4? And we say, sure, 3 goes into 4 one time. 1 times 3 is 3. And then we subtract and we get 1. And this 1 is a remainder. And originally we go and we say, okay, remainder 1. And then eventually we got to the point where we're like, okay, well, remainder 1 doesn't work anymore. So let's write it out as 1/3. And then eventually you got into doing some decimal stuff and so on and so forth. But we're going to stop right here, okay? Now, when we're doing polynomial division, the same thing applies. We still write the x plus 3 out front. We put our polynomial underneath the little house, I think it was described as 17x squared plus 21x minus 11. Now this polynomial doesn't have any missing terms, but if it did, we would want to write those in as 0 and whatever. And then we're going to focus on this x. We're going to say, what times x is 3x cubed? So we're going to say 3x squared, because 3x squared times x is 3x cubed, and that's the key. We want to multiply that so that it disappears. We also have to distribute not only to the x, but also to the 3. So 3x squared times 3 is 9x squared. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract. Now I'm never very good at subtracting. I didn't do very well on that in school. So I'm going to change my signs and add. And by doing this, it's hopefully going to eliminate any errors I would make with signs. So now I have 3x squared and negative 3x cubed, and that's 0, x cubed. I would also have 17x squared and negative 9x squared, and that's going to leave me with 8x squared. Now what was the next step? Well, I brought down what the next term was. So now I bring down the 21x, and I say, okay, well, what times x is 8x squared? And you say, well, Mr. Garrett, 8x times x is 8x squared. So I write that down, and I have to again distribute to both the x and the 3. So then I say 8x times 3 is 24x. What do I got to do next? I got to subtract. Change my signs and add, because I don't want to make any mistakes. And in doing so, I get 8x squared and negative 8x squared. That's 0x squared. That's good. 21x and negative 24x is negative 3x. And then the last thing, bring down that negative 11 all the way from the top. And we say x times what is negative 3x? We say negative 3. Negative 3 times x, negative 3x. Negative 3 times 3, negative 9. What do we got to do to finish? Change the signs and add. So I make that a positive, make that a positive, and then I go over here and I say negative 3x and positive 3x is 0, negative 11 and 9 is negative 2, negative 2 is now my remainder. And so I'm just going to put negative 2 over x plus 3 as my remainder. And this is my solution. This part right here is my quotient, and then this part is my remainder. And that's what we're going to do with polynomials. Now, of course, it's going to get more difficult, okay? That's the way it usually works. Here we have a little bit different divisor, 4x minus 1, going into 8x squared plus 34x minus 1. And again, let's focus on that first term, that 4x. I'm going to say, what times 4x is 8x squared? You say, well, 2x times 4x is 8x squared. So I write that down. 2x times negative 1 is negative 2x. To subtract, I change my signs and add. It's helpful if you have a different colored pen so you don't mess this up. You got 8x squared and negative 8x squared, that's 0. 34x and 2x, that's 36x. Bring down the negative 1. What times 4x is 36x? 9. So we say 9 times 4x is 36x. 9 times negative 1 is negative 9. And again, we want to change our signs and add, which is also another way to say subtract. And we get 36 plus negative 36x, which is 0, negative 1 and positive 9, which is 8. And 8 is my remainder. So I write up here plus 8 over 4x minus 1. And that is how I get my answer. Let's do one last long division problem. And we can see here this is getting a little trickier now because we're dividing by x squared minus 3x minus 2. So I'm going to write that out front, x squared minus 3x minus 2. Under the house, I'm going to put the other polynomial, which I believe is called the dividend. And we're going to write 4x to the fourth. Now we're missing an x cubed term, so we'll write 0x cubed. We're missing an x squared term, so we'll write 0x squared. We have a 5x, so we'll write 5x. And then we have a negative 4 to finish it off as our constant term. Focus on that first term. The only reason we worry about these is when we multiply back down. So what times x squared is 4x to the fourth? Well, 4x squared is 4x to the fourth. 4x squared times x squared is 4x to the fourth, and that goes right down here. We need to redistribute to all three terms now. So 4x squared times negative 3x is negative 12x cubed. 4x squared times negative 2 is a negative 8x squared. Once we have all those parts, we subtract. And by subtracting, I mean add the opposite. So I go and change the signs and add. 4x to the fourth and negative 4x to the fourth is 0. 0x cubed and 12x cubed is 12x cubed. 0x squared and 8x squared is 8x squared. And then I simply bring down the 5x. With that now, I take the x squared and I say, what times x squared is 12x cubed? Well, that's easy, 12x. 12x times x squared is 12x cubed. That works. We're eliminating that first term. 12x times negative 3x is negative 36x squared. And 12x times negative 2 is negative 24x. Again, we want to change our signs and add. So that's a negative 12x cubed, a positive 36x, and a positive 24x. I eliminate those. Here I get 44x squared. Here I get 29x. And then I bring down the negative 4. Last thing, what times x squared is 44x squared, and it's 44. 44 times x squared is 44x squared. 44 times negative 3 is going to be 120 and 12, so 132 minus, let's see, minus 132x. And 44 times negative 2 is negative 88. Let's change our signs and add again. Negative 44x squared, positive 132x, and a positive 88. These cancel. This here becomes, let's see, 161x. And this is 84x, just 84. So my remainder is this because x squared can't go into 161x. And I just put the 161x plus 84 over x squared minus 3x minus 2. Now, some of you might be asking, why are we going to do all this? Well, eventually we're going to want to break down polynomials. And when we break down polynomials, we're going to have to divide. But before we get to that, we want to talk about synthetic division, because synthetic division is an easier way to divide when we're dividing by x plus a number or x minus a number. Okay, now we've already done this problem. We did the long division. It was the first problem we did. We'll flip back and check to make sure we did it right. Okay, but what we're going to do is we're going to use synthetic division, and synthetic division is a lot like synthetic substitution. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the coefficients of what I'm dividing. So the dividend here, 3, 17, 21, and negative 11. I'm going to skip a line, draw a line, and over here to the left, I'm going to write a box. And in that box, I'm going to put the opposite of positive 3, which in this case is negative 3. Now, we're going to go through the same process we did before. Bring down the 3, multiply up, gives us negative 9, add down, so that's going to give us, let's see, that's going to be 8. Multiply up, that's negative 24. Add down, that's negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 3 is a positive 9, and then we get negative 2 as we add down. Now, the way that this works was this was x cubed, 3x cubed. Now it's 3x squared. This was x squared, so now this is 8x. This was x, so that's our constant. This right here is our remainder. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to finish this problem off by just saying when we divide these, we get 3x squared plus 8x minus 3, and then that 2 is the remainder, so negative 2 over x plus 3. Hopefully, this is the same answer that we got at the beginning. So let's flip back to the first page, and you can see 3x squared plus 8x minus 3 minus 2 over x plus 3. 3x squared plus 8x minus 3 minus 2 over x plus 3. Much easier to do it this way. The only problem would be if we're missing any terms, and if we're not dividing by x plus a number or x minus a number, we cannot do synthetic division. And so that's how we do polynomial division, both long and synthetic. So I hope you learned something, and we're going to use this in the next video as we start to solve polynomial equations. Take care.